Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for joining us for another Dean Chat. This time we have our exciting guest. But before I introduce our exciting guest, please subscribe, like, and share. These podcast videos are created so the Muslims have an alternative to what is already out there. So inshallah, we're going to introduce our esteemed guest, a very, very humble person, Professor Shoaib Ahmed Malik. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, everyone. Thank you, Waqas and Ridwan, for inviting me to your show. I'm absolutely humble and honored for the invitation.
Alhamdulillah. And also, we got our host behind the scenes and editor, Waqas Mirza. Waqas, give us salam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I just thought I'd join today. So one, Ridwan has company, and two, to give him those reminders about hitting the notification bell and the thumbs ups.
Brilliant. Brilliant, Waqas. You're doing the job great. We're going to sort of jump into it, Professor Shoaib, and appreciate your time you're given. I'm going to keep this natural and organic. Like I always say, you're, as an icebreaker, you're going to a journey of Hajj on a ship. It's a long journey, and you're picking a lot of different people on the way, and the people you don't pick, they'll make their own way to the Hajj. So it doesn't mean anything at all. So in terms of accompanying you from the theologians of the past, from the Muslim world, who would it be, Professor Shoaib?
Oh, I think for me, hands down, my role model from the tradition is Imam Ghazali. I personally got very inspired him in my very early days when I started practicing, which was around the age of 22, 23. So that's about 12 years ago now. And I found him to be, in the beginning, I was very scared of Imam Ghazali because I adopted a different strand of thinking. I remember people telling me, "Oh, don't go near Ghazali. He's this, off the manhaj guy, right? Don't touch him." And alhamdulillah, after kind of exploring and reading and just doing my own research, I felt that I resonated most with Imam Ghazali. And I just found him to be an amazing figure. His balance in thought, his extreme intelligence, his insight into things, and just the kind of transformation that he was very explicit about in his personal life. And I think that kind of, shaped me personally as an individual, but also in my outlook as an academic.
Brilliant, brilliant. So let's see our next. Go on, Waqas.
Before you move on to the next question, so why do you think people have that kind of outlook towards Imam al-Ghazali?
Yeah.
Right. So I think there are a couple of connotations surrounding Imam Ghazali, both of which I think are misconstrued. There's one thing that people think of him as this like overly driven Sufi guy. So he kind of, went on this very spiritual high drive, and he kind of left and shunned, rationality and philosophy and all of that. And so I think that that's one reason why people may not want to look into him, because they think he kind of advocates for things that are against the Sunnah or against, certain Islamic practices, which is not the case. So that's one way of negatively construing Imam Ghazali, and I've seen that quite a lot. The other reason is because people think that Imam Ghazali kind of shunned philosophy and scientific thinking from the Muslim world. He wrote a book called Tahafut al-Falasifa, Incoherence of the Philosophers, which is a refutation of another, gigantic figure in our tradition, Ibn Sina, Avicenna. And he wrote that book because he just wanted to say that, hang on, bro, you've got a few things wrong in your worldview. These are 20 of them, and this is my refutation of that. And unfortunately, you've got like Islamophobes, Orientalists, and also some ignorant folks who latch on to that, and they'll say, "Yep, he's the guy who caused the decline of the Muslim world. Ghazali is the guy who's responsible for that." So that kind of thinking has proliferated both amongst non-Muslims as well as Muslims. And I think that's why you get this anti-Ghazalian vibe. But if you read him, on his own terms, through his works, you definitely don't get that at all. And unfortunately, it's just, these are very common myths that just keep proliferating in the virtual space as well as in the social space. That it's hard to kind of get rid of that clique. But you keep on educating people. And that's what I did. And I was able to kind of see through that very easily once I got down to reading his stuff.
Brilliant. The next question I was going to move on to then is, what book would you then take with you to accompany you on that journey?
Oh, to Hajj? Oh, right. Okay. I would say for me, there were two books that have really kind of impacted me of Ghazali. The first one is Munqidh min Dalal, so Deliverance from Error, which is his own autobiography. And it really impacted me because I felt that book kind of gives you an insight into how he was thinking and how it kind of shaped his understanding of everything. And he gives a very refined understanding of the changes that he's gone through and the different inquiries that he, started getting into, and how he landed into spirituality quite beautifully, not in opposition to rationality or science, whatever, but just how it became an organic manifestation in him, because he realized that there's a limit to your senses, there's a limit to your mind, but there's that one source that's just untapped, and it can give you a level of understanding that none of these other two resources can, and that is your heart, your spiritual heart. And I found that to be a very beautiful book. The other one potentially is a very simple book, and I think people might be surprised by that. It's a book called Ya Ayyuhal Walad, oh boy, right? And it was for a student, or perhaps his son, not sure yet, but and it was basically like a manual guide on how to approach the sciences. How do you progress as a Muslim? And I remember reading through that and I started crying because it was just so well written. And this was. It's amazing that you have an individual who wrote books like 1,000 years. He died in 1111, right? And still his works can kind of hit you in the heart 1,000 years later. So I find that both of those are kind of apt summaries that I personally like. And they gave me a lot of formational development, both in my mind, heart, and body. So I'd say those two books would be two that I'd want to take.
Alhamdulillah. And in the sort of contemporary time, again, who would you like to take with you? I'll tell you what, who I'm more thinking of in that sort of colonial post or colonial pre-period, actually. Yeah. In particular, sort of like Sheikh Shamil of Dagestan, or Omar al-Mukhtar from Libya, I think it is, and Abdul Qadir al-Jazari from the Libyan part, Algerian, apologies. So if you are familiar with them, and if not, you have someone else to pick, who would you pick?
Can I pick outside of those?
Absolutely.
So for me, in today's climate, and I can choose only one, you said, right? Only one individual?
Yeah.
It'd be a tough one because these two people are the closest to me in my heart in terms of my development. It would either be Sheikh Yasir Qadi or Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. Either one of those two. Okay, that's good. Yeah.
And finally, to end it on a simpler note, what food would you take with you to accompany you to make that journey a little bit more comfortable?
Man, so you're asking this at a very difficult moment in my life. So I'm transitioning to a more healthy lifestyle, hence the Fitbit, and that stuff. So I've always been a burger boy. I mean, that's my kryptonite, burgers, right? But I've shunned them away now just to kind of lead a healthier lifestyle. But imagine if this Hajj was a magical Hajj where you never gained weight and health was never an issue. I'd go with burgers.
Brilliant. Well, listen, you're going to be doing the tawaf, so you'll burn it off.
Yes, exactly. So, I'm going to do those.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, the 10,000 steps, man, every day. Tawafing it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, alhamdulillah, that was a nice, easy icebreaker. Now we want to get to know a bit more about yourself. So tell us your upbringing, your accent, where you were educated. So from the beginning.
Right. Okay. So my dad was born and raised. So my parents are Pakistani, right? They come from Pakistan. But my dad was born and raised in the Middle East, in Kuwait in particular. My mom was raised in Pakistan. They got married and they settled in Kuwait. And I was born and raised there as well. So 2 generations born and raised in Kuwait. So I'm not a homegrown Pakistani. I was born and raised outside of Pakistan. So I identify as a Pakistani just by passport, if that means anything. That doesn't mean I have anything against Pakistan. I'm just saying statements as facts, right? So I'm not going to be the same person as somebody who was born and raised in Pakistan. And so I was always in a very mixed crowd. I was with Arabs, I was with Desis, I was with British folks, because I was in a British school my whole life. All the way up to 18, did my GCSEs, did my A-levels. And people get surprised because I've never stepped a foot on American or Canadian soil. Never been to the States, never been to Canada. So this accent, pulls a lot of people's eyes over their heads. Like, where did you get the accent from?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
so, so even though, all my teachers were British, I personally just got it, I think, most likely from TV, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's how it just stuck. But
sorry, Professor Shoaib, you get a lot of people who are educated, with British institutes in the Middle East, but they still pick up the American accent.
Yeah, I think there's a social dominance there of that. Maybe this is an influence of the international vibe that you get. Because remember, in Britain, it's very homogenous. Like you'll see most likely that same accent coming across, right? But in Middle Eastern turfs, it's not the same. You are going to get English accents that are not just British.
Wow. So
you may have American students. You're surrounded by American TV in particular, right? You also have foreign students, and so one accent doesn't necessarily, ground itself. And so I think everything is up for competition. I think the closest one that you resonate with or you're around is going to be something that you pick up. So my wife, for example, she's Iranian, and she had a British accent before marrying me. But after marrying me, she has an American accent. So
they say you got to compromise.
Yeah. So I mean, I do see them, but I mean, what's interesting is even though I was in the UK for 7 years, so I finished my high school, I did my A-levels, and then I went to the UK for my studies. Right. I actually wanted to be a computer graphics designer. I loved Counter-Strike. I love those games, where you just play constantly on the PC. But my mom, I remember she mentioned this very interesting advice. So back then, I wasn't very religious. Like I was just, like a culturally grown Muslim. But my mom was, mashallah, always, on it. And she said, Shoaib, don't do computer graphics. I go, why? I have the grades. I can do it. And she's like, there is a debate among scholars whether drawing's haram, halal. I'm like, oh gosh, okay, fine. So you know what I did? I was like, okay, so I've got a good grade in chemistry. I've got a good grade. So I did chemistry, physics, math, and computing. So those are the 4 subjects that I did, right? So typical engineering track predetermined for you. So I'm like, okay, I'm good at chemistry, good at math, right? Let's just go for chemical engineering. So I went to University of Bath, and to my utter shock, it's nothing to do with chemistry. It's 95% physics and math, which was like, oh my God, kill me now. So
I think that's a common misconception. A lot of people, when you say you're doing chemical engineering, they're like, oh, so they think of labs and like doing experiments and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I constantly get asked, what's that name? Yeah, do you, sir, have you watched Breaking Bad? Like, no, I haven't watched Breaking Bad. It's because they have this conception that engineering is linked to that. No, chemical engineering is all physics, mostly physics and math. Anyways, alhamdulillah, it was a good decision. So I went to Bath, and I had a culture shock because I've never been on British soil, at least when I was there when I was 18, and everything was like, whoa, this is a totally new place. And so I had to learn a lot of new things for myself. So coming from a very Pakistani and therefore very shielded background, there are a lot of things that I didn't know how to do. Cook my own food, go for my own transport. So in Kuwait, for those of you who know your geography really well, Kuwait is like a little nugget of an island. It's like so small, right? Mm-hmm. So for us traveling, if you want to say you want to go to another city, that's like a 10-minute, 15-minute drive. That's it, right? Nothing more than that. My dad, he, mashallah, he took me to Bath on my first, trip there, so that he can help me understand, because he's flown a lot. He's an international businessman, mashallah. Yeah. And we arrive at London Heathrow. He goes and buys the ticket for the train, and he comes back and he said, Shoaib, sit down for 2 hours. I'm like, what? Why are we sitting down for 2 hours? The train is not coming for 2 hours. I'm like, what? We wait for 2 hours for transport? It just did not click with my mentality. And then on top of that, the second shock was the train itself from London to Bath takes 2 hours, 15 minutes. I'm like, oh my days, how big is this place?
I know UK is a small island, but it's big at the same time, The span of it is quite a bit, and like you said, Kuwait is it's between Iraq and Saudi Arabia, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right,
Yeah, so I can imagine it's a smaller distance. But here
It's
we've got
huge.
weather changes, you know.
Yeah,
One part could be sunny, the other part could be raining.
yeah. So that was like a big thing for me. So you had all these like, worldview shifts, paradigm shifts happening. And then, you also had the social sphere. So you got to see how Muslims in a different environment are practicing. Some are, on one side of the spectrum, some on the other side of the spectrum. And so I went to the undergraduate degree and I did really well. I was top of the class, so I was valedictorian. And then through that, I got a fully funded scholarship to do a PhD in Nottingham. And so that's why I never did a master's. I went straight on to the PhD program. And then it was actually during my PhD that I got more into Islam. And it's mostly because, and this is, again, a very funny turn, my supervisor was one of the most amazing people that I've ever met in my life. And he shaped me, for what I am today. He was an atheist. And he kept asking me questions about Islam. And I'm like, I don't know what the answers are to these questions. I don't know what you're asking of me, right?
Can I just say, does the Western academic system really put to question the Islamic way we study and we learn and how we, is it epistemology, understand facts and evidence?
Right. So I think that this will vary from person to person and from institution to institution. I don't think you can have a generalized answer here. There's some places that are very hostile to religious perspectives. Maybe some particular departments, not necessarily the university as a whole, and maybe some particular individuals. Not all professors are like that. And some are very open to people having their respective faiths. So I think it's pretty much your luck at the end of the day. I have several colleagues who are in the UK. I've got people in Cambridge, in Edinburgh, and in Birmingham, mashallah, and in Cardiff, right? And all of them are very open to theism, right? So or religious beliefs. So I don't think it's a generalized statement that you can make on this matter. I think you have to assess on a case by case basis.
Or could that be a British culture thing as well? Sort of a very liberal perspective, and therefore a bit more willingness to understand different ways of, that theological position, different way of understanding facts.
Yeah. I think that the fact that you have a diversity of opinions is something that you definitely see in the West that you don't see here. Here, it's very like homogenous, and it can be due to both intrinsic and external reasons, right? So intrinsic, I mean people's personal beliefs, but also in terms of how politically everything is structured. So there's a lack of academic flexibility in some arenas in this region, as opposed to the West. So there's a bunch of factors that kind of show this kind of homogeneity that you see here versus the heterogeneity that you see out there in the West. So that is a factor,
Yeah, and tell us about your mentor then. And he was
about what?
Your mentor who was questioning you regarding Islam.
Right. So let me move on from my supervisor. So he was one of those very smart Cambridge graduates, right? So you sit in the room with him, 2 minutes in, you feel like you're the biggest idiot in the world right now. So just because that's how smart he is. And then on top of that, he asks you questions about your faith and you don't know. So that's what kind of triggered me to kind of look into that. And more importantly, I never joined the ISOC when I was at Bath, because I went in 2007, which is when you had the 7/7 bombings in London. And so my parents kind of told me, don't join Islamic society. I mean, that was the international parents' concern. Don't join Islamic societies. Don't get brainwashed, etc. Right? So I can understand that. That's a valid parental concern. And so when 2010, when I entered the PhD, that's when I kind of started, experimenting. I joined the ISOC. And that was like a huge push for me. Like, within 6 months, I started doing khutbas. In the ISOC, it was like that much of a radical shift. So I used to be a rock star. So I used to have long hair, chains, and all of that. In 6 months, the beard came out, the topi came in, the jalab, everything kind of changed. And my parents flipped. They flipped, right? Yeah. So it was a radical shift in the beginning. And I remember the learning process was hard, fast but hard. So, like you're very eager. You want to really kind of be the best Muslim that you can be, right? And so I remember in my naivety, there was this, I bought like Sahih Bukharis and I put them and I stacked them up, and all of these things. And I remember just randomly took it off and started reading a hadith. And the hadith about if your clothes are above your ankles, you're going to be hellfire. Yeah. So there's a context to that, right? There's a contextual appropriation of that. But I just took it as is, and I had all these, long dresses that I wore to Jummah Khutbah, and I'm not a stitcher, and I have no stitching experience. So what I did was,
I can see where this is going.
Yeah. So I put them on the bed, and I literally folded them up. I swear to God, this is a true story. I stapled them. They went to the Jummah Khutbah.
It's called initiative.
And everybody's asking me, Shoaib, what's this bling bling on your clothes? And, oh my God, man! And I look back at that now and I laugh. It's just so funny. But yeah, this is the kind of experiences I had, right? So it was a learning curve, right? You just want to be the best Muslim.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry to go off on a tangent, but I think this is a good point you've raised, and we'll come back to your story. But what advice would you give to people, when they reach that kind of a point in their life where they actually want to turn back to Islam, or they've just newly become a Muslim, and they've experienced what you were experiencing? What kind of advice would you give them?
And just before you answer that, you get a lot of people who get this epiphany that they want to, be a bit more practicing. So what do? They pull out their phone or laptop and go Google Islam A to Z, and they lack the traditional way of learning under a sheikh, a scholar who is vetted by either one of the 4 schools.
Yeah. I think Sheikh Bilal Ismail from Al-Kauthar Institute, I think he made this point that Islam itself is a beautiful white canvas, but we've kind of thrown all kinds of paints at it, which makes it really difficult to understand what is Islam, right? Because if you just go down to Birmingham or Manchester or London, you have different messages all saying different things sometimes, right? They're all, of course, speaking from Quran, Hadith, but what is in the interpretation? What is, their viewpoints? Go ahead.
Forget different cities. In the same town, you'll have different mosques saying different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You get my point. So the diversities are so overblown that you immediately become kind of worried. Hang on, am I getting the right knowledge? Am I speaking to the right person? And that kind of freaks you out a little bit. It really does. And unfortunately, it's just the way it is now that we just have to get through that maze somehow. And my advice to young people in particular, and people even who convert to Islam or start practicing, I always tell them to remain, just be cautious of one thing, right? Keep an open mind and learn with humility. That's the first step, right? Keep an open mind. Even what I say may be wrong, so go to someone else, right? So I keep telling students that you may not agree with some speakers, that's fine. You may not agree with that, fine. Ground yourself a little bit, learn from someone, and then grow out of your shell. And eventually, you'll be able to see the different colors, the different shades, the different tones, and you'll be able to make sense of it. But you need to make that first step in learning, in having that right intention.
I think, Professor, you hit the nail on the head there. Regarding that learning and the hadith regarding طالب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم, studying is a fard upon Muslims, and I think that's a crucial part. But the problem is, who do you learn from?
Yeah. So for me personally, I can share my experiences with everyone, and people will not necessarily have those experiences because the world was so different 12 years ago than it is now, right? Remember, this was just when Facebook got off, High Five was kind of fading away, MySpace. If you don't know these platforms, that means you're really young. Well done. Kudos to you. For the old gen, you will know what I'm talking about, right? So MySpace, High Five were all kind of dissolving, and YouTube really kicked off at that time. That's when people like KSI were developing their first videos. Yeah. Okay, that's for the new gen out there, right? It's a reference point, right? So my references at that time were 4 people, and they still are. So it was Nomali Khan, Imam Suhaib Webb, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and Sheikh Yasir Qadi. Those were the 4. since my first days. Those were the big four that I kept following, and I still follow them, right? And so they kind of helped me. So how did they help me? I can tell you. Noman Ali Khan kind of allowed me to love the Quran and access the Quran in a way that I can understand. Allah gifted him with that knowledge. Allah gifted him with that articulation, right? Whatever the negativity that surrounded him a couple of years ago, that we don't need to get into that. I just take the good, leave the bad, right? So that's that. Then you had Imam Shoaib Webb. He taught me the humanity in fiqh. So what do I mean by that? He's the one who kind of started explaining things like how these different madhahib have leniency and flexibility for Muslims today. So I remember...
Can I just come back on that? On that note, regarding the hadith you said of Sayyidina Abu Bakr and his garment, and he said to the Prophet, what about me? And he said, you're an exception to the rule because of your figure, Sayyidina Abu Bakr. And it's interesting where the Hanafis come along and say, well, there it is. See that exception. If it was fard across the board, then there is no exception for anybody. Therefore, what they interpreted, the Hanafis, that is there's degree of flex in regards to the hadith. I'm not going to go too much detail into the fiqh part, but it's exactly what you said. It's not just what it says. There's more to it, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So you were saying about the humanitarian part of the spirit of the law, I guess.
Yeah, the spirit of the law. And Imam Shoaib Webb, I still remember this. This was 10 years ago, man. And he the way he spoke about fiqh, I've never seen anyone speak like that before. So he was saying that there was a non-Muslim who converted to Islam, and her parents were very anti-Muslim. So she used to pray in secret, and she would pray in the bathroom, right? She would pray in the bathroom. And that's a bit of a taboo question in fiqh because you can't pray in that area, right? So she asked him, can I pray in this? And he mentioned that 3 madhabs don't allow it, but one does, that you can't. It's not like the most lenient thing, but it's possible. In that circumstance, allow it. The rules are black and white, but humans are not black and white. The picture is colored. And that really kind of touched my heart in terms of how alive our tradition can get and relate to that. And that was the first time that, I saw, because remember when you're going into religion, and I can only speak to my experience, right? When you're going to religion the first time, the first thing that keeps coming up and again are the punishments. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Even my tarbiyah was like, don't do this, right? The had. What is the had, right? But that rahmah really kind of clicked. And that kind of showed me that it has that intrinsic flexibility to deal with these new kinds of questions and environments. And then that kind of got me into Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf has this ability to reach out to your heart, no matter where you are in your journey, to reach out to your heart. I mean, he can talk about water, tahara, right? Purity, and how water can affect your ablution. And then he drags it into a spiritual realm like I've never seen done before. Yeah. So he has that gift, mashallah, like he has that. So he connected that heart aspect for me. And then Shaykh Yasir Qadi was the mind. The way he academically kind of refines things, he walks you through the difference of opinions, the nuances, the way he churns out a narrative. I just found that amazing, right? So just if you see it, like, I mean, like this is how I divide it. So when Archangel Gabriel, he came to the Prophet ﷺ, right? Yeah. And he asked him, what is Iman, what is Islam, what is Ihsan? So those are the 3 things, right? So body are the submission of your Islam is the submission of your body. That's why you have those 5 arkan, those 5 pillars. Iman is to do with your mind. That's why you have 6 pillars of belief. And Ihsan is basically spiritual striving to get to the level where if you don't, you cannot see Allah. Allah sees you, being aware of that internal consciousness. So you have body, mind, heart, fiqh, kalam, and tasawwuf. And for me, these scholars kind of embody that for me, and they really shaped me for who I am today. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for these 4 individuals.
Alhamdulillah. And so continue then us on your journey. You were stapling your trousers just so they meet the requirements.
Yeah.
And then where did you go from here?
Right. So when I started learning, and I eventually I had to get out of the airwaves, right? So these digital airwaves were where I was getting lectures about these four individuals, but then I wanted to kind of take lessons, and so this is when Al-Kawthar and Al-Maghrib became really big in the UK, right? So you had these qabilas, you went to Birmingham, you had to go to Manchester, and I attended my first one in Birmingham because when I was in Nottingham, that was the closest city, right? And bear in mind, as an international boy, my parents were very worried when I traveled across cities, right? So, and that was a valid concern. I give them that, right? At that moment, I didn't understand it. Now I do as a father. I understand what their concern was. So, anyways, me and my friends, we go to Qabilat al-Fawz. That was their name, if I remember correctly. Mashallah, that was the first time I got to see, you know, what a lively community with a bunch of brothers and sisters organizing, you know, working towards, you know, striving knowledge. And the first exposure that I got with Al-Maghrib was actually with Sheikh Yasir Qadi and Sheikh Naveed Aziz.
Yeah.
So those are the two scholars. And that was about, if I'm not mistaken, it was a tafsir class or something to that effect. I don't remember exactly. And that was like a mind-blowing experience, right? That was like a really mind-blowing experience. And I loved it. It was amazing. And so I started going off in these retreats. And I got to see so many people. I got to see so many cities. And I just got to seeing how people are thinking. Al-Kawthar and Al-Maghrib, both of them. I tried attending both of them, right? And eventually, however, so it got to the extent where in my second year of the PhD, I just stopped caring about chemical engineering. It was literally just a deep dive into Islamic studies, right? So I swear to God, hands down, the second year of my PhD was just a long study of just Islamic studies, and that was it. And I'm also an avid reader, so I read books a lot and fast. And so I was able to kind of go through several hundred books in that year, and that kind of gave me an overview of the kind of landscape that we're dealing with. So starting off from that naive little Shoaib who just was reading black and white to now kind of understanding more of the openness. And then that's when I kind of really started appreciating through that process Imam Ghazali, because I came across his Ihya Ulumuddin. That's his magnum opus. Yeah, since then I kind of felt that I now want to go into Islamic studies. I don't want to be an engineer anymore. So I spoke to my dad, quite frankly, because he was still footing the bill for my living expenses in the UK, right? And bear in mind, for an international father, that's expensive to bear. That's not an easy quotation to hold up to. Anyways, I spoke to him. I said, look, I think I want to drop the degree. He said, look, do the degree, finish the degree, at least use it. You're already halfway through. I'm like, okay. So I grudgingly went through the degree, got the degree, alhamdulillah. But since then, I've been just on this path to learning. So since 2014, which is when I submitted my dissertation and graduated, I started studying with various shuyukh. So the first one was Avicenna Institute with Sheikh Atabek Shukrov before the partition, in that institution happened. So for me, I don't say anything bad, but I studied from them and I took whatever I can from them, and alhamdulillah for that. Then I moved on to Sheikh Ali from the Meme Institute. And this Sheikh really opened up my eyes to al-Kalam. Like, Sheikh Ali is jokes. He is proper jokes. Like, I would throw all kinds of difficult questions out just to tease him. And he would give me answers that would not only blow my mind, but I know it would annoy him to go from A to Z to give me the answer to that. Because I'd kind of throw in all kinds of, hypothetical examples against him. But I love Sheikh Ali. He really is one of my personal teachers, not somebody from an airwave, but somebody who I've really studied from. And I love him. He's an amazing Moroccan scholar. MashaAllah.
Before you come in, just for our viewers, so Ilm al-Kalam, can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Oh, right. Yeah. So in Islamic studies, you've got a variety of different things you can learn, right? So you've got Sufism, you have tazkiyah the-nafs, so training of the heart, right? How do you kind of tame your heart to be open to reception of spirituality, right? There's also hadith studies, you also have fiqh, usul al-fiqh, so studying jurisprudence, the study of halal and haram in Islam. And then finally, to do with the mind, ilm al-kalam is basically the study of creed. As a Muslim, what do you need to believe? What are the safe beliefs that you need to have as a Muslim to safeguard yourself on the Day of Judgment? So remember, body, mind, heart. You need to do certain things with your body. You're praying your 5 times a day, your hajj. You need to believe certain things to be a Muslim. right? If you believe in two gods, that automatically disqualifies you as a Muslim. And you need to train your heart so that you can have the highest maqam, the station, inshallah, on the Day of Judgment. So these are the three things. So ilm al-kalam deals with the safeguarding the mind. These are creedal propositions that you need to believe as a Muslim.
And this is where the text like of Imam Tahawi and the Maturidi school comes about, and the Ashari school comes about, and even Imam Malik's school, just to codify the theology. Is that correct?
But yeah, it's basically a discipline where you understand what you are required to believe as a Muslim, and just like how you have co-valid schools of thought in fiqh, Hanafi, Hanbali, Maliki, Shafi'i, you have also co-valid schools in theology, Ash'ari, Maturidi, and the Athari, Salafi, Hanbali, whatever name you want to give that third group. But yeah, those are the three main schools in Sunni Islam. If you're Sunni, you follow one of those three. So that was my interest. I really got interested into that. I'm not a fiqh guy. I don't have, not that I disqualify that study. It's just not for me. It's not my cup of tea. I don't want to, sit 3 hours and discuss what is tahara or not. I just want to tap water. I do my wudu, khalas. That's it. End of story. Very straightforward for me. I'm not going to get into the nuances there. So yeah, for me, the more abstract stuff is very interesting. My mind is like that. I was into physics. I was into math. So it naturally kind of propelled me towards that. So,
out of curiosity, which madhab do you follow, if at all?
So are you talking about fiqh or in Aqidah?
Oh, both, I guess.
Okay, so this is a good question. So my parents are Hanafi, so they taught me Hanafi. In Kuwait, it's Shafi'i, so I also learned Shafi'i through school. And then Sheikh Ali was Maliki, so I learned some Maliki as well. But so it's kind of a three. But I personally, whatever is in my environment, I just follow them. I think that makes more sense. Right. Just to kind of avoid discord, because in Maliki fiqh, for example, you put your hands down, right? You don't put it on your stomach. So if I'm in an environment where I know that people may not know that, they think I'm causing like disunity, or they may be, well, what are you doing, Shoaib? I'll just follow them. So I'll do this when I need to. I'll do this when I need to. I find acceptability in all of them. I don't follow anyone rigidly, but if I were to choose one, it'd most likely be the Hanafi school. That'd be it.
Okay. And what about an Aqidah?
Aqidah, I make it crystal clear, I'm Ash'ari. But I have I understand the disagreements between the schools of thought, just like you have in fiqh, there are some disagreements. I think I'm most inclined towards the Ash'ari school of thought. I make that crystal clear in every one of my presentations. Right?
So from here, you're studying and you're also doing your Islamic studies. And once you've finished, is it your postgraduate you were mentioning?
So I finished my PhD in 2014, and then alhamdulillah, shortly after that, I got this job as a professor of natural sciences. So during this time, I was studying whatever I just mentioned. And right now I'm an instructor, but also a student at Al-Balagh Academy. So I'm doing the Dars al-Nizami. So that's the basic syllabus that you have to do to kind of, and I don't like the word to be qualified as a sheikh. For me, sheikh is just, for people who have that title. I don't consider myself a sheikh. I'm just studying to kind of get all those knowledge disciplines in place, right? But for me, the area that I really focused on was ilm al-Kalam, Aqidah. This is the area that I really got fascinated by. And I started realizing that in this space, there is hardly any interaction of contemporary discussions, science being one of them, right? So that's how I kind of got into this. Well, what am I good at? I'm good at science, and I'm really interested in this ilm al-Kalam stuff. What are the interfaces of these two? And that's when I took a deep dive since 2014 until now into the whole field of Islam and science and religion more broadly. And as a result of that, I did. So I first did my PGCE, which is an online degree. So for those viewers who don't know what that is, that's a basic qualification education, right? Postgraduate certificate of education. And it basically gives you kind of like a license to teach in the UK. You need that to teach in high school. Now also in university, it's a requirement. Right after that, then I did my MSc in Science and Religion at Edinburgh. And that kind of really opened my eyes to the discourse. So it allowed me to understand how do you research in this area? What kind of things do people talk about? What is the scope? What is the methodology, et cetera, right? So that really was an eye-opening course. However, and this is something that even the instructors at Edinburgh knew, it was very Christian-centric. Nearly every single book on science and religion is always predicated on a Christian perspective. Why? Because it's developed by Christian professors, philosophers, scientists, theologians. So naturally, it will be acclimatized to those sensitivities. So the Islamic stuff was very, it was very little, if anything. There were only a handful of books on Islam and science. Now, so when I started getting into this field, you find a few books, a few names that keep popping up here and there. So there's, at the moment, from what I can tell, there's only maybe like a dozen people working on Islam and science in different dimensions, actively, only 12 in the world. And not even like fully, they're working this as part-time, if anything, right? So it's a very nascent new field. And so I looked at this entire landscape. So there's a lot of questions that come up, right? The Big Bang stuff, the design arguments, right? You have evolution, right? And I looked at all of this during my MSc program, like, what is the most difficult thing right now for Muslims? And I landed on evolution. That was the most difficult thing that I think that was causing an issue for Muslims in the Muslim world. So I decided to kind of look into this area to see what it is about. Okay, why is this causing so much issue? Why is this causing a problem? And I mean, maybe some people said that was a mistake because you're talking about evolution all the time now. So for me, it literally was just a curiosity because I knew that it was causing theological problems. So why is it problem theologically? Let me see that. Let me investigate that for myself.
Could you share some of the theological conundrums people are facing with evolution?
But
yeah, sure.
Maybe if you could give an overview of what evolution is for those that may not be even aware of it.
Yeah, sure. So evolution is a very simple theory. So let me add a caveat here because I think this might be of interest. So I'm a very chemistry, physics, math person. I hate bio. I sincerely hate, no offense to doctors out there or people do biology. I personally hate biology, right? It is for this reason I dropped it at GCSE, never took it at A levels, and astaghfirullah al-azim, it was the first thing I studied in my chemical engineering degree in Bath. Why? Because apparently there's something called biochemical engineering as well. So we had to take it. So 5 years avoiding and you still come across fats, lipids, carbohydrates, and all of that. I'm like, please, I don't want to learn this. And then, subhanAllah, 10 years later, got into biology again, evolutionary biology, right? So
you were destined for it.
Yeah, it was just kismet. Yeah, it's just, I'm like, why can I not get away from this topic? Because I really don't like it. And I remember okay, so I did it not because it was a personal obstacle for me, but I just wanted to see why is this causing theological problems. So what is evolution? Evolution is a very simple theory in terms of understanding it. It is a scientific attempt of understanding how all of these different life forms came about. So what do I mean by life forms? You've got birds, you've got trees, you've got monkeys, tigers, us. So where does it all come from? And so the theory of evolution is a very simple idea. It boils down to three main propositions. If you understand this, khalas, you pretty much understood it. Number one, the Earth is really old. So we know that the Earth is now around 4.6 billion years old. This is, far and beyond our previous, estimates based on, passed down tradition, around 6,000 years old. This is mostly inspired from biblical narratives, right? Other Abrahamic and other religions such as the Indian and the Chinese narratives, they always believed in an older. They never had the Abrahamic conception of 6,000 years old. So that's one proposition. The second proposition is that we believe all of us have parents. All three of us have parents. They have parents, and they have parents, and they have parents. That's how you get a nice family tree, right? Evolution just takes that same argument, stretches it to everything. So they believe that species come from earlier species and they come from earlier species. So eventually, when you put it all up into a picture, it looks like a tree of life. So life is evolving just like how you have trees with branches, with twigs. And humans are just one output of that, just like everything else that exists today. So over time, there were species that no longer exist today. They're extinct. And then we carve out their fossils, we do analysis, and we put them on the map. Where would they fit on the map? Right? And then
can I just quickly come in there? Would there be an issue then to believe, we've seen the breeding of ponies into horses, wild dogs, wolves into domestic dogs. So, there's that degree of evolution and change and breeding. Yep. But obviously, would there be a problem as a Muslim to say for the animal kingdom, plants, they can change and interchange, but for the Homo sapien, maybe obviously as a Muslim, you can't. We've come from Adam alayhi salam. Could we not set on that? So animal kingdom and the rest of the world, natural world, yeah, probably it could exist. But us, we came from Adam alayhi salam.
Right. So you can see quite intuitively how this will cause problems with the Islamic narrative. As since a young age, I've always been taught that Adam alayhi salam was the first human being, and all of us came from him, right? So one of the things that I wanted to kind of ask myself was, did any Muslim scholar before 1859 ever think of evolution? And the answer is clearly no. Muslims never dealt with that. This was only post 1859 that this started becoming an issue. So what are our possibilities in terms of understanding evolution in light of the Quran and Hadith? Now, there are a couple of different positions. I don't want to simplify stuff, but I'm just kind of, throwing stuff out there based on my books and the videos that I've done on YouTube. So feel free to go into those for more detail. But we have to keep one thing in mind, and that is that as Muslims, we affirm that miracles happen, right? We are not a society that disbelieves in miracles. We believe that God created the world. If he wanted to, he could do anything he wants in that matrix. He could create miracles if he wanted to. So we are committed to Adam alayhi salam being a miraculous creation. We are committed to Hawa alayhi salam being a miraculous creation. And also we are committed to the idea that all of us have a lineage that goes back to these two people. All Sunni Muslims are committed to that. If you're not committed to that, whether you're in Sunni Islam or not, that can kind of that conversation can happen later down the line. But this is what Sunni Islam believes, because we believe in miracles, right? Now the question is, can human beings come out of evolutionary processes? Yes or no? So we believe definitely, because of these three propositions, that there's a conflict here. Some people say that evolution doesn't happen at all. This is just a bogus theory created by the West, etc. So they believe that each species was created directly by God. This is known as creationism. Okay, so some people believe that position. Some people believe the position called human exceptionalism, which is the position you articulated with one, where evolution is true for everything, but we humans, we're out of this. We're excluded from this narrative. Some people adopt the position, what I term as Adamic exceptionalism. And this is simply the idea that, yes, we affirm that Adam alayhi salam is where we come from, and Hawa alayhi salam is where we come from. But the Quran is silent on when he existed. So we have no historical dating of when Adam existed. We also don't know what existed when he was there. Could there have been other human-like entities? We don't know. The Quran doesn't contain those scientific details. In evolution, do you know when Homo sapiens, so Homo sapiens are what we characterize as us. The earliest Homo sapiens existed 200,000 years ago. We also know that Homo sapiens interbred with other things that look like us, ashbahul bashar, things that are very similar to bashar, right? Neanderthals, Denisovans, we actually have some of their DNA in us, right? Where did that come from?
And even the big brow, isn't it?
Yeah, the big brow. Yeah, exactly. So all of these questions kick up. So what can I affirm as a Muslim? Yet at the same time, if I want to believe evolution, what can I commit to? So as long as we commit to the idea that Adam alayhi salam and Hawa alayhi salam were created miraculously, and we have our lineage that goes back to them, perhaps maybe Adam's descendants down the line could have interbred with these other hominins that could have coexisted. Since we don't know when, we have no clue when Adam alayhi salam existed. We don't know what coexisted at the time of Adam alayhi salam when he was created miraculously on earth. We have no commitment to what kind of interactions took place. Wallahu alam.
Professor Shoaib, can I then push back on that? And then, just like in the Quran, Allah talks about yad and his foot, his hand, all parts, and we leave it be. We just we don't look too much into it. It is what it is. So in these matters, could we not do the same? Say it's knowledge that Allah hasn't clearly defined, and therefore we leave it as it is. It started from Adam alayhi salam, and
very awesome question. So I love that question. So yes, you're absolutely right. This is ilm al-ghayb, right? So as Muslims, we cannot make something a matter of creed, of theology, unless it is mentioned in sam'iyyat, in scripture. Okay? That means you leave the possibilities open. So for example, Ridwan, you seem like an educated man. Let me ask you a question. Does the Quran require you to believe in dinosaurs?
No.
No. Does the Quran require you to disbelieve in dinosaurs?
No.
No, right? It's ilm al-ghayb, it's history for us, right? But the Quran either affirms it or denies it. So whether you believe it or not is open. Both are open-ended. Yeah? The same thing here. If there were ashbah al-bashar and all of that, right? We have evidence for them. Now, they existed. They could have existed, could not have existed. Did some of them interbreed with Adam's descendant? Could have, could not have. Wallahu alam. So we say wallahu alam. But we have to also be true to that principle and say, the nusus does not close that possibility. That's the key thing. The scriptural details do not close that possibility. If the Quran was crystal clear that there was no interbreeding, there was nothing else, khalas, game over. There's nothing else whatsoever. The Quran doesn't say, it doesn't come with those details. So as a result of that, all these three propositions that I articulated, creationism, human exceptionalism, or Adamic exceptionalism, and I'm sorry if I'm cutting this short, but there are more detailed videos out there, which hopefully these guys can put. But yeah, these three are jaiz. What we are not committed to, however, and this is my conclusion that I'm sharing with you, is that Adam and Eve had a mother and father. We are not committed to this. This is a problematic position because it violates several ayat and hadith that are quite crystal clear on this matter. So I'm not bending the verses. I'm saying, read what the verses are saying and read what the hadith are saying, but also look into what they're not saying. That is important as well.
Just a few things I just want to add. Obviously, Professor, you've written a book on this, haven't you? So if people wanted to, as well as watching your other lectures and videos, they could read that book, because I think it goes in a lot more detail on this subject.
Yeah.
You can just touch upon that in a minute. I just wanted to add also is that, for some people, it's like Brother Ravan said, they could just be like, okay, I'm just going to leave it as that it is, and we're going to leave it at that. But other people they're a bit more, they start getting doubts. They start getting, especially in this day and age where it's being kind of pushed down your throat. And for them, it's not just be like, okay, I'm going to leave it be. They want to know more. Why is it like this? Why like that? So for them, this is a way of kind of solving that issue within their mind. At least that's how I see it anyways.
Yeah. So I wanna make sure that this is crystal clear, because people think that I'm out there to defend evolution. I say that even if evolution is true or false, there are options out there for you. So if you want to disbelieve in evolution, that's fine. Theology doesn't force you to commit to believing or disbelieving in evolution. It doesn't fit either. If you believe in evolution, you can believe in human or Adamic exceptionalism. If you don't want to believe in evolution, khalas, be a creationist. What matters to me on day of judgment, what do I need to believe to get to heaven? That's my benchmark. And you need qat'i dalala wa qat'i thubut, which means established in terms of chains of transmission. So the scriptural detail that you're looking at is mazboot. It's absolutely robust, historically robust. And then the inference, the meaning of the words are robust. There's no ambiguity whatsoever. And when you use that, because when you want to make something a point of creed, has a very, very, very high bar, very high bar. That's why we cannot make certain statements points of creed. For example, we cannot say that whether you believe in angels having 600 wings or 500 wings or whatever, it's not a point of creed. It's an exegetical detail. It's something that ulama discussed, something here and there, but it's not a theological discussion. In whatever position you take, you're not going to get to heaven or hell because of that, right? There are some things that are heaven and hell discussions. This is not one of them. So, and that's the key thing, to articulate what is fixed according to our creed, what is open, and what is silent. That's the key thing. What is silent? And this is a key thing that I like about my investigation in Islam and evolution. That if the Quran doesn't say anything about it, just that's it. Be quiet about it. And for me, there's a lot of humility in that. If something is a part of ilm al-ghayb, history being one of them, history being one of those things, if the Quran doesn't affirm it or deny it, keep the possibilities open. Why close them unnecessarily? Why create fitna unnecessarily? Right? So that's been my approach. This is something that I've learned. Now, don't get me wrong. I didn't come to these conclusions day one. This was like a 7-8 year process, quite a thorough process. I remember reading, so I have like 5,000 books right here in front of me, and I had to go through all of them just to kind of make sense of this, because it's a very difficult field. You've got to understand Islamic theology, you've got to understand philosophy, you've got to understand science, and a lot of good people, good-hearted people around me who kind of helped me understand where I was wrong, etc. Sometimes very stupid mistakes. There were some things that I had gaps in. And so it was because of these, good-hearted people like David Solomon Jalajal, who I consider a good friend of mine, my friend Nazim Muhtaraglu, Suhaib Saeed, who's the tafsir doctor. He also kind of helped me out. He's very good at criticizing you, which I like. So you need that for the heart, but also for getting your ideas fleshed out. If you can't take criticism, you have a heart problem. You really have a heart problem. So all of these people kind of vetted it. Yasir Qadi read the book as well, and a few others. And that kind of really kind of helped me push through what is and isn't allowed. And so,
can I also come in there, Professor? I guess it's difficult, like you said. It's a new field. A lot of the Islamic sciences, we have that sanad tradition where the previous scholars of the scholars back to the Salaf have said an opinion that actually can become creedal. But what do you do, like I said, with evolution when no one spoke about it in the past? So you couldn't look to anyone.
Yeah, exactly. I think that we do need to have an understanding that there will be things that people spoke about according to their time, right? For example, there's I forgot the exact hadith, but it went to the effect of something like this. The Prophet ﷺ, he was walking by, and there were these cross-pollinators, right? And he asked them to do it flan method, different to what they were doing. And so they followed the Prophet's advice, thinking that this is probably coming from, higher authority. They did it, and in the following year, the yield didn't come. So there might be some things which we will figure out, which were discussed in the past, according to the rubric and the understanding of that period. So when we have new challenges, there are going to be new questions that are going to come up, and therefore maybe require new answers. This does not mean whitewash the tradition. This does not mean neglect the tradition. And nor does it mean disqualify everything that people said in the past. No, you stick to their methodology. The key thing is the usul, the methodology. My approach has always been, what is the methodology of ilm al-kalam? It is X, Y, Z. All of these ulama followed it. Did they disagree on some opinions? Yes, they did. But this is the methodology that they stuck to. So if I take that same methodology, apply it to a new conversation, what would that look like? And this was the outcome that I had in this book. I wrote a book about it, and I came up with some conclusions.
So you're saying the usul definitely goes back to our traditional way of studying and grounding ourselves, as opposed to a new look at the rules, especially from that perspective. Yeah. Also, in regards to, I guess, theology, would you say it's a must-have for all Muslims to be grounded in our theology before they embark in reading evolution or encountering any of these?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that need to be qualified here. Number one, everyone needs to learn theology up to a basic limit, right? At least. If you want to become the next Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali or Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, then go for it. Specialize in that all you want, right? But otherwise, everyone needs to have a basic theological background. And believe you me, it will help you see the world with such clarity in front of you. So that's the first thing. Number two, for any kind of conversation related to intellectual doubts, be it coming from the philosophical or the scientific side, I can tell you that your theology will help you a lot in dealing with this. But if you approach these head on without that background, you will for sure, well, I can't say for sure, most likely fall in doubt. Most likely.
Professor Shoaib, one other thing then. I want to talk about a little bit about the Athari school. So obviously is it much more recent than the Maturidi and the Ash'ari school? And what's the controversy with that one school to the other two?
Right. So, okay, this is now a bit of a okay. So without causing any problems on either side, right? So traditionally, ilm al-kalam, the Aqidah school, were mostly the Ash'ari and the Maturidi school. These were the two schools that were known as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah for at least 1,000 years after the Prophet ﷺ passed away and the Reformation, the formation period happened, right? So remember, when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, things like usul al-fiqh, usul al-hadith were not developed at the time. This took a process of 300 years. Even ilm al-kalam did not exist in those first kind of years. Of course, they understood those things, But the formalization of these as disciplines, rules, textbooks, discussions, manuals, they came over a process of 200-300 years. Out of that process, Ilm al-Kalam was born, and then you had multiple schools, you had multiple theological camps. Out of that flourished the Ash'ari and the Maturidi school of thought. And these were the creedal schools that last with us till today. So if you go to Al-Azhar, if you go to Zaytuna, if you go to CMC, if you go to any of these big centers in the world, you will study these things. Okay? Now, the Salafi track kind of got reignited, or rather, let's use the right word here. It got stimulated by a person called Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah was not so well known in his time, but his ideas eventually became developed and adopted by a particular school of thought known as the Athari Hanbali Salafi school. Okay? And this was more of a recent thing that happened over the past 300-400 years. So this, and it got more popular in particular because of Saudi Arabia. This was their paradigm, and it kind of propagated through various, media outlets, Darussalam publication, whatever have you. So this is a version of Islam that does have a historical track, but was very heavily stimulated, particularly in the past 200 years of scholarship that came out of Saudi Arabia, right? Fair enough. So there are some tensions between these schools in terms of, for example, understanding certain scripture references, particularly in reference to God, right? So, for example, if you say that God has a hand, right? So one camp will say, well, you can't ascribe a hand. God doesn't have physical things, right? So this is most likely a metaphor for power. The other camp will say, no, we believe that Allah has a hand, but the kayfiyah of it, we don't question. So these are small debates. Sometimes they're big debates, right? And I don't like to go on the track of, no, you're wrong. At the end of the day, for me, you have a valid, way of interpreting this. You have a valid way of interpreting this, and alhamdulillah, that's the main thing. As long as we're on the same borders, that's the main line of the day. For me, they're all brothers and sisters. I don't quite, create ikhtilaf in this area. I do make it clear that I follow the Ash'ari system, but I have nothing against, I'm not going to go out and have a beef with my brother sister from the Maturidi school or the brother sister from the Athari school. So that's been my approach. Always have epistemic humility. The other person may know more than what you think you know. So that's always been my way of kind of looking at the issue. But alhamdulillah, that's all I can say.
Alhamdulillah. And so, in regards to any upcoming books, or even, are you into sort of bringing your view more into the public sphere by debating maybe current people who are actually arguing the opposite on the evolution camp?
Right. So for me, I've been invited to debate a few times, and I've come to the conclusion that I think debate is mostly drama in today's landscape. And in addition to drama, I think it's more of a matter of how you say rather than what you say. And I don't think that is the most constructive use of my time. I believe that Allah gave me the gift of writing well, reading well, and I'm just going to focus on those skill sets and just utilize them until I hit the grave. I think that's the best use of my time. If people want to study with me or work with me, I'm more than happy to do that, and I've done that. I'm actually teaching students from various parts of the world, shuyukh as well, and we're working on together. We're co-learning as well, so they'll teach me about things that I don't know, and I'll teach them about things that they don't know about, and that's been a beautiful relationship, and I feel growth through that. I'm also working on empowering the madaris around the world. So teaching them about, some of the latest philosophical developments. That's why in Al-Balagh Academy, for example, we're teaching a course on Islam and science and a course on philosophy of science. Never been done before on Al-Balagh platform, right? So, and then hopefully also teaching that at other institutions as well. So for me, I think that's the best way to go forward. The debating system has its own framework, and it has its own people. And mashallah, there are people, way better than me in this area, and I'll let them do that. But for me, I don't consider myself a debater. I feel like I'm more of an educator and an academic, and I'll just stick to that lane.
And Professor Shoaib, what about if people say regarding Kalam, it has links to sort of the Platoism, and Greek theology?
Right.
How would you clarify that?
Right. So we have to understand that Ilm al-Kalam definitely had a Greek heritage, in the sense that a lot of the Greek ideas, so people like Aristotle, Plato, some of their ideas did impact certain scholars. And some of these schools, the Ash'ari and the Mazi schools, do owe a lot to that Greek heritage. There's no denying any of that. But that does not mean just because it has a Greek heritage that it was just blindly carried into Islam. No, there were a lot of things that were flushed out. If you go back to a key example is Imam Ghazali. The reason why he criticized Avicenna in his Tahafut al-Falasifa, Incoherence of the Philosophers, is because he actually criticizes some of the Greek perspectives that just do not gel with Islam. Here, Ghazali is appropriating those Greek thoughts through a theological lens. Even basic stuff like mantiq. Before Ghazali, mantiq or logic was always associated with a group of people, the Hellenic philosophers, Muslim Peripatetics, right? So Avicenna, Al-Farabi. And people looked at them with a very, wary perspective because they were considered, these guys are not too, on the manhaj. That's how they were viewed. Ghazali studied all of their works. He appropriated logic from an Islamic lens, wrote several books in this area. And it was because of Ghazali that logic became firmly established in the madrasa system. This is historically established, right? So not everything in philosophy is bad. Ghazali's entire purpose was take the good, leave the bad. And that's a very, very important thing to understand, that everyone has a heritage, but that does not mean it's blindly accepted and followed. There's some things that are critically appropriate, some things that are just discarded, and some things that make sense that we want to carry forward. And alhamdulillah for that. So people, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in regards to sort of Abu Hanifa and his, is it Nahu, his, logical way of understanding the fiqh mas'ala, could we then derive that theological element from there? Very methodically thinking through.
Yeah. I think so. Like, I think you've got to bear in mind that for a lot of these scholars, they had a very rational way of codifying these things, right? Imam Shafi'i wrote the first, like you could say the fiqh text, right, of the time, the Risala. Imam Hanifa, he kind of had this sharp mind in terms of going into jurisprudence, right, which was grounded in his theological framework. That's where the Maturidi system kind of gets tied up with Imam Hanifa. So yeah, definitely. I think that these were all people who took what were the best skill sets of the time and advanced them in light of that Islamic prism. And I think that's what we should always try to do. If you look at philosophy of religion today in particular, there have been many developments that have taken place in the past 100 years, really, really interesting developments. And there's a lot of interesting spaces in here where Muslims can take a lot from the tradition, but also engage with these new developments in light of that tradition. So that's why if you have people like Ramon Harvey, who looks in the Maturidi school, Safrik Chowdhury, Nazif, I have a book that's coming out where we're looking at 8 different tracks from Islamic thought, right? Ash'ari, Maturidi, Athari, Salafi, 8 different of them. And we're looking at how you can use their worldview to address concerns in Islam and science today. So we're trying to make the Turath, the tradition, more relevant, that can have clear exercising principles for the average Muslim in the 21st century, inshallah. That's at least the way I see it. I don't want this to be just discussions of history that, what did Ghazali say? What did that say? That has its time and place, but our tradition is not something that we just look at from a museum's perspective. It is an active tradition. It is an active construction. And I think it's high time that we kind of have the confidence to engage with thought, but also the challenges ahead of us. And that's what I'm planning to do for the next, whatever number of decades that I'm alive for, inshallah.
Should we then try to implement maybe learning philosophy or science in madrasas and Islamic schools?
So there. I mean, I have plans, inshallah, where as part of creedal issues, when you learn creedal stuff like Imam Tahawi's book or Sharh al-Aqaid, those kinds of things, there's some things that we need to get rid of. They're like very old conversations. We don't need, like, for example, previously they believed in something called atomism, where the world is made of just atoms, right? These are like very discrete particles, and they govern everything. So you are made out of atoms. This wood is made. Everything's made out of atoms, right? Now that is an outdated worldview that we don't necessarily need to subscribe to today. Why that is, we can get into later when we have a class together if you want. But the purpose is, it's no longer. I mean, we live in a world where we have any ontologies that the past never considered: multiverses, string theory, quantum mechanics. hyper relativity and all of that, right? Does that mean they're disqualified just because we thought of these, based on rationalist principles? There's a couple of things that we need to kind of revise there. But overall, most of the principles, I think, are very relevant for today. And then through that, introduce philosophy of religion and philosophy of science so that the new generation of shuyukh that are coming out are fully gripped with some of these new conversations. And then they can have the backbone to address the questions that the young generation needs, inshallah.
Speaking of the young generation, what advice would you have for Muslims who are struggling with this, whole Islam and science and scientific arguments and these kind of things?
Right. My advice to them seriously would be to really learn creed. It's the first stepping point to understanding all these conversations. If you don't know your basic theology, you're literally like wind. If I flicker one way, you're going to go that way. You flicker the other way, you're going to go that way. You're just literally in a pool, and wherever the tide goes, you're just following that. Creed gives you an anchor, and it allows you to deal with any tide that comes your way. The moment I learned al-Kalam, that's when I got an amazing understanding of how to deal with some of these challenges. And I never felt more confident than that, ever. Before that, you just felt that you were always like wondering, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? Oh, it's so confusing. But once you get creed sorted out, everything becomes simpler to deal with. Of course, learning creed on its own does not automatically mean you have all the answers, but it goes a long way in helping you get those answers.
Professor Shoaib, one thing I really enjoyed, and it blew my mind away, like testimony. You know how like sometimes in the science they have that whole weight towards imperialism, what you can see, measure, smell, touch, and all that. But the fact that I've always given an example of a blind man who can't see the color red.
Yep.
And he's been born blind, never see it. He can't see it, measure it, smell it, touch it. He can only take testimony from someone.
Right.
Right. And so when you take that testimony of that the Sahaba saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how there were so many that the probability that their accounts will be not true is very slim against the argument that their accounts were true. You start to build a very strong frame all of a sudden, of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's existence, of his miracles, which then, based on testimony, it becomes very strong. But what's interesting is if those who sort of talk about the Big Bang Theory, a lot of the people didn't first look at the data themselves. It's always secondhand. They're taking it on the good faith of a professor who did the. I hope you understand what I'm getting towards here.
Yeah, I get you.
So they're taking belief and faith that so-and-so did the actual calculation with the data to come towards a probable theory of the Big Bang, because there's multiple ways of interpreting the data. But yet they won't take that as faith or belief or testimony. They'll just take that as fact. But when you put your argument forward that there's a belief system here, that's wishy-washy belief. You have no substance or metrics to measure it. So I find that the double standard there quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I completely get you. So there was a movement that started off in the early part of the 19th century called higher biblical criticism, where we kind of really look at the Bible through a very scientific lens. We try to measure it historically, etc., making sure if it's valid, invalid, whatever have you, right? With biblical studies, it led to an exposure of some of the inaccuracies in the biblical chronology, right? But with Muslims, with the Islamic stuff, and this is now very recent literature, it's the complete opposite. It's reified how strong that isnad really is, right? So I find that quite interesting that even now, historical scholarship, both by Western, and non-Muslims, they kind of reach the same conclusion, which is very interesting. I found that as I think it's not necessarily a validation exercise, but it goes to show that it's recognized even by non-Muslims.
I think what's even more interesting, and this should show the miracle of this deen. How, and I know I like fiqh a lot, which is why I keep referring to it, how the hadith scholars are verified. To be a mutawatir narrator, the key steps and the criterias that you have to take across the span of your life. And if you were to make an error in your elderly age of a hadith, that would work against you. Despite, that is phenomenal way of measuring, and how can you, like I said, you couldn't have other religions on that same scale. The way Allah preserved this religion and the tradition is nothing less than a miracle.
Yeah.
And that's what, again, and I think a lot of that Western science isn't familiar with, and is just unaware of. They don't know how we preserve it. They just think it's, like you said, oral tradition, sent down. But the fact that we have a robust science, it absolutely just needs to be known for them, and Muslims as well.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah. I think that the more you study, Islam properly on its own terms, I think you begin to see that there's a lot of strength here. And despite the shubahat that are out there, there is a lot that can be offered, hands down. I agree with that.
Alhamdulillah. And then what we're going to do, inshallah, is part with our final words. Professor Shoaib, what would you like to tell the listeners and viewers of this podcast and video?
So,
also, you did mention that, you like writing, and I know previously you said you're working on 6 books, and then I recently heard from yourself that you're working on 2 more. So maybe you can tell us what they're about as well.
Yeah, inshallah.
Right. So my personal belief is that if you're good at something, stick to it. So I don't necessarily try to be a jack of all trades, right? So I'm not the exegetical scholar. I'm not a faqih. I'm not any of those. I'm just focusing on Islam and science. That's one area that I'm just literally zooming in on all the time. And then as a result of that, there are several books that are hopefully coming out in the next 2-3 years, 8 in total so far. Inshallah, there'll be a few more. But some of them are to do with how to teach Islam and science. So this is now a book on pedagogy. And it's written for both universities as well as the madaris, the seminaries, in an accessible language so that you have resources to be able to engage with these materials. There are other books that are, for example, conference proceedings. So we've had conferences about certain issues. So most recently, we had a conference on Islam and exotheology. So exotheology is the theology of what does it mean for aliens to exist and have contact with human beings? How would that affect our creed? That kind of stuff. So that conference was in Qatar, and we recently got a book contract with Bloomsbury that's coming out. So these are, some examples of the kind of stuff that I'm doing that will hopefully be making an impact in this area over the next 2, 3, 4 years, inshallah. There'll be more that will come out. For example, we have a special volume coming out. I can't say which journal yet because it's not official, but that is going to be on several new developments in Islamic theology in light of contemporary advances. This includes a new argument for God's existence. It includes a perspective. So in philosophy of religion, miracles is a big conversation, but there has been no philosophical thorough exposition of what miracles mean from the Islamic standpoint. 0. So that's going to be done for the first time, right? So a few things that are going to set the trend in Islamic philosophical theology, again, which will impact not just the academic community, inshallah, help the wider community as well as the madrasa systems. So I have all 3 communities in mind when I kind of work on these projects. And the plan here is to kind of have enough literature out there, free to download. So you never have to buy these, inshallah, that will hopefully give empowerment to the Muslim world in whatever capacity that I can and limited means that I can, but that is richly informed by the tradition, has the confidence to engage with new questions, but is also diverse. All this output is not just from the Ash'ari perspective. We have other Sunni perspectives. We also have Shi'i perspectives coming out in these works. So I work with everybody who wants to engage with this. Of course, we keep our difference of opinions to ourselves, and we acknowledge those. We have complete respect for one another, but we also want to kind of move forward and see how that looks like. So that's the kind of stuff that you can look out for if you ever do decide to find me up on Google or whatever it is. Absolutely. And I hope that it benefits you, inshallah. One last thing that I'd like to share with you, and this is exclusive to you guys because I don't think I can make it ever fresh news again. So while we were talking, I just got an email from ISSR, not USSR, ISSR. ISSR is the International Society of Science and Religion. There are only 300 members in the world of this. It's a very elite society. Within that, there are only 7 Muslims. I just became one of their members.
Oh,
right?
mashallah.
MashaAllah.
They just sent me an email that my book won the award this year for the best book on science and religion.
Alhamdulillah.
That's on your channel, guys. That's the barakah that you're going to get.
Please go right here.
Alhamdulillah.
That's fresh news for you guys right there. Alhamdulillah.
I think, look, I'm so humbled you shared that with us. And like I said to Waqas off care, it's interesting that as Muslims, it's our duty to keep pushing the dawah.
Yes.
You know, like you said, you're good, whatever you're good at, push the dawah there. You know, if it's enough for you to go to work and say a good word or two about Islam, then that's enough. But if you've got the ability, like I said, to write books and talk to people, then bismillah, go take your skills for the sake of Allah and push the dawah. And that's what I really enjoyed this podcast, because it's not your traditional typical, it's definitely forward thinking, and definitely in the footsteps of Imam Ghazali. You know, in his time, he was thinking well ahead, and inshallah, Allah blesses you in your endeavors, and all the other shuyukh and professors who are definitely on this. Any parting words from Waqas?
Yeah, no, Jazakallah khair for that. It's been really interesting. I'd definitely love to have you back on, and maybe we can go into more detail into one of the subjects, maybe even about aliens. Who knows?
Maybe I can interview you guys on your own show. Let's see how that.
You could do. Alhamdulillah. Then on that note, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and see you all next time.
Right,